I don't want to shock you, but Konami has in fact messed up again. Yeah, rather amazing from them, who would have thought it? Also, we have got, well, what seems to be one of the worst games of this year, but more importantly, the very, very bizarre development story behind it. I mean, come on, how in the current year does this King Kong situation get released? Also, an interesting report on, well, lots of BM going on in gaming and a few other things. We've got to kick it off with Konami and Metal Gear Solid. So, Konami probably thinks that they've been very clear about what Metal Gear Solid Volume 1 collection is, right? Where it's not a remaster, it's not a remake. It is basically just a situation where, much like with the recent Red Dead Redemption stuff, they're effectively just doing a new release of the original game on a new platform. Kind of like, a sort of utilitarian GOG release. Except over on GOG, well, they actually currently already have Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear. But basically, no bells and whistles, just the games, including the first PC release of Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, at times this would have been a kind of reasonable thing. Obviously, the remaster started to kind of increase in quality as time went on, and then we started seeing the likes of what Capcom were doing with the Resident Evil games, or perhaps the Bluepoint remasters. I mean, have you seen the Bluepoint Shadow of the Colossus and Demon's Souls remasters? They're incredible. Of course, Bluepoint would be picked up by Sony in 2021. But in a world where we're used to that kind of thing, and then we see really a subpar effort, yeah, that's not going to fly particularly well. Especially when a PC port is in fact so bare bones that it's not even going to have proper mouse and keyboard support. And so, for months then, people have been confused about things like why Metal Gear Solid 1 is locked to 30 FPS on all machines, while the Switch can't run Metal Gear Solid 2 or 3 at 60, which is strange because the original Metal Gear Solid 2 ran at 60 FPS on the PS2, right? This, of course, then led to Konami producing resources to educate everybody, right? With, how the game is going to be running and the various different platforms. Certainly a bit rough that on the Switch, yeah, you are not going to be getting that good of a frame rate. But, this kind of thing you could have expected. Now, looking at Konami, though, I mean, come on. This is a straight re-release. Basically, not that much work needs to be done. At least, not that much work for a group as large as they are. How could they possibly mess it up? Many people would think. Because yes, Konami couldn't just release a bare-bones product and be done with it. And that is how we've actually ended up in our current mess with the state of this collection and Konami providing IGN with a list of issues that would have to be fixed. So, let's just go through that. Let's just see how Konami managed to mess it up. Run. Bonus content for the Metal Gear / Snake's Revenge NES ports has subtitles that don't sync up, while in Metal Gear Solid 3, there are multiple known typos to fix within the subs. Now, for the MSX versions of Metal Gear 1 and 2, as well as the Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3, post-launch patching is going to be adding support for full screen and windowed modes. They'll also require some bug fixing with slowdowns needing to be fixed on 2, as well as a few other things. So that's what Konami owned up to IGN, right? This is what people found out there would be in terms of problems before the game came out. So what then happened when it actually did come out? Well, Konami added pausing during cutscenes. It takes 10 seconds for the pause button to be registered per streamer, so that's pretty cool. The game has no audio settings. At all. There are just no audio settings, so that's kind of amazing. There is no way to go back to the collection menu from inside a title. Controls continually reset to the original Xbox layout even after being remapped. Next is kind of weird. So Metal Gear Solid 1 actually requires language packs to run in Steam, and these language packs are basically done via DLC, but the DLC doesn't actually get automatically attached to some users' accounts, which basically means for loads of people, they literally cannot launch until they fiddle around with the Steam backend to get that DLC. And then, seemingly the rendering for Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 is 720p baseline, which means that when they're scaled up, it looks absolutely, it looks pretty damn bad, basically, for 1440p and 4K monitors. And it very much seems like the PC port is having a rough time here with basically the assumption being that Konami may have just paid for an emulator wrapper around existing versions of the game and pretty much done, what appears to be the bare minimum effort. Now, this is fixable as picked up by PC Gamer. It took a modder just hours to add 4K support to the Metal Gear Solid collection. There we go. And the thing to me that's really sad here, right, is Even if you want to go full old school and just kind of like give people a new way to play the old game on their newer hardware, you can at least go in and add lots of quality of life, so that whenever people have given their hard-earned money over, they actually feel like they're getting something other than the bare minimum in return. As an example, the keyboard and mouse issue. Like, that's one thing. Another one, I've seen what modders have been able to do to emulated versions of these games, like, you know, cranking up the internal render resolution to make things look so much better, and you just ultimately kind of realize so much of this work has been done for free by the community. I mean, Konami didn't even go to the effort of stealing people's free work, which is really quite impressive considering this is all just emulated stuff, and surely there is so much like work floating out there in the public domain that they could steal other people's homework. Not that I'm necessarily advocating that Konami do that, it's just the point here is like, it seems to be so low effort, and ultimately this is in the broader context of Kojima getting the boot, them falling out in a way that absolutely does not have people liking Konami whatsoever, and then seeing that when it actually comes to doing this, which should be celebrating some of their legacy, they absolutely have phoned it in, which is crazy. It's weird. Now, some data mined evidence is there saying that there will be a Volume 2 collection that will have Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 4, and Metal Gear Solid 5, and that means that in about a year or so, we're going to be able to do this news story again. Because I'm pretty damn sure that if they put this little effort into this one, they're probably going to continue in the same way. Yeah, pretty unfortunate. Okay, our next story then, that is some monkey business. What is going on? What is the deal with this game, right? This King Kong Skull Island game. You look at it and you think, what? When did this come out? Is this a King Kong, like a gacha game? For like old mobile devices? No, it's not. This is a full price video game that you can go and buy in Steam. And not for cheap, because if you want to experience the rise of Kong set in the year 1835, you will have to pay $34.99. I don't know, maybe that's like $40 in America. There is, of course, the Colossal Edition, which does come with the Colossal Pack, which I'm sure all of us are very, very excited about. This is a truly bizarre situation. I mean, just take a look at this gameplay footage. Like, what in the hell is going on? How is this actually made? Of course, going across the Steam reviews are terrible. The reviews from outlets, they are terrible. Perhaps you saw this cutscene that was just being clowned on across X. That was also very, very funny. But what's actually happened here that's very interesting is Ash Parrish, who writes for The Verge, took the time to work out how the hell this even happened. This is where it gets somewhat more interesting. So, would you be shocked if you found out that this game was maybe not developed under the best circumstances? So, it's by a Chilean developer, Iguanabi, and they basically make a living off doing work for hire games. Yes, because like a lot of the time you just hear of, studios who make their own games that come out on Steam, be it like indies, AAAs, whatever. There is a whole network of support studios, art houses. As an example, take Lemon Sky. Lemon Sky were responsible for a whole bunch of the art assets for Warcraft 3 Reforged. That was a total disaster. Do you know what Lemon Sky also did for Blizzard? StarCraft 1 Remaster, its art assets, which, look incredible and totally respect the original game. So with a lot of these things, it's down to like the working conditions of whoever's giving them the contract, right? How quickly do they want to turn around? And looking at Iguanabi, they have worked with Hasbro, Google, PlayStation, Wacom, Game Mill Entertainment, and that last one, Game Mill, it's a pretty good name for this. Yes, they are the people involved here. They are the publishers of Skull Island, Rise of Kong. And per The Verge's discussions with these developers, Game Mill really did not set our friends at Iguanabi up for much success at all. Quote, "The development process of this game was started in June of last year." Yes, this was a recent interview, meaning 15 months ago, and it was aimed to end on June 2nd this year. So, 1 year development process, said a developer at Iguanabi, who wished to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal. Isn't that lovely? So allegedly between 2 and 20 people were working on this game at any one time throughout this 12-month development process. And then a developer within Iguanabi, who worked with Game Mill stuff previously, basically said that Game Mill just wouldn't really give them enough information to actually do the project. So they kind of just ended up having to come up with stuff. Now, obviously, 12 months, but also 12 months of chaos, not actually being given, enough detail about a project, not really having that much staff. This whole thing was crunched together. Quote, "The crunch was really set in motion in February," said the developer. "I was on automatic pilot by the end of February because all hope was lost." Right, so it's the end of February. This person just had to turn on autopilot and kind of just go through life, almost just a little bit detached so you can get through it. And that's not what you want to hear. So basically, that this game, this absolute travesty Trashfire exists, I mean, that is kind of down to the pretty much heroic efforts of a bunch of game developers. It's just, this is what they've had to do to, keep their job, to not get fired for, I suppose, saying, hey, this is crazy, this is never going to work. Who knows, maybe Iguanabee themselves, like they were given the money, they had no control over this. Who exactly knows? But the weird thing is, like, Game Mill, what's the deal with them? Because they clearly had a budget, and they probably had some sort of like, minimum return that they thought they could get. I presume just off having like the Skull Island kind of like name, the brand going on. It's honestly baffling that this even exists. And I really do wish we knew what the actual budget here is, especially the case when they can take the money that they have in the USA and spend them on a Chilean dev, where they can probably get quite a lot further on the same amount of money. So ultimately then, this is really weird for those smaller independent companies. It puts them in a little bit of a bind. Like, we know that Iguanabee are actually capable of doing more things, but if it is just some bizarre Game Mill licensed product where the publisher basically doesn't care and you're just kind of plodding forwards to keep the lights on, I suppose it leads to a weird situation like this. Here's a quote. "It's a love-hate relationship because they are the ones who accept or give the projects, and Iguanabee doesn't have the means to develop almost anything on its own because, well, money," said a developer who worked on this game. And the thing that The Verge highlight is when we actually go through what Iguanabee have done, they recently were part of an award-winning collaboration on an original title that actually seems to have been adequately planned and funded and staffed by people who are happy enough to be there. Here's another quote. "To be honest, they seemed much more motivated and enthusiastic than the rest of the team working for Game Mill. Who knows why?" Ultimately then, this is just weird. It reminds me of, it's not the same as, was it Rise of Black Tiger or Legend of Black Tiger? That's, that PSN, absolutely, like, notorious crap game. You do just wonder, though, like, this is fake work. This is never really going to make money. Why does any of this happen? What is the deal with all of this goofy bullshit? I seriously don't know. Yeah, absolutely bizarre. Next then, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. It's had its online-only requirement be removed for the Steam Deck, not for anything else. Which I suppose, like, yeah, I'll be on an international flight soon, that'll be quite nice, but otherwise, why not? Why not anywhere? And this truly is an exceptionally strange thing where only the Steam Deck build of the game has this requirement gone. And the strange thing is, this has happened without explanation. Activision actually haven't said why they have done this for the Steam Deck version, or haven't done it for the other versions. It's very bizarre. The thing is, though, if you don't like this, you can basically just trick your desktop into thinking it's a Steam Deck, and via doing that, you can play the game offline. Still, this is bizarre. I truly do not know why. Okay, finally then, an interesting report from Unity, actually. This was a survey of consumers, about 2,500, and developers about toxicity in multiplayer games getting worse. This was done by Unity, and there are some very interesting figures. Players saying that they encounter toxic behavior has increased from 68% to 74% from 2021 to 2023. Half say that they encounter it regularly. Of course, that will depend on what sort of game you're playing. Funny enough, shooters are up there at 51%, and card and deck building games are down at 23%. Fairly interesting. Obviously, it's exactly what you would expect. It's going to be your shooters and your MOBAs where all of the, the bad manners, the toxicity comes in. I suppose what I would say, though, or my question to you, and that's why I kind of left this for like a little chat at the end of the video, how often do you see this? And I'll talk about my own experience. World of Warcraft. If you're doing Mythic Plus dungeons with randoms, you have a high chance of finding toxicity, like within your play session. So absolutely, I would say within World of Warcraft, that's something that gets to be a regular. I've done recently, right? Because I just wanted to test out a character. I was doing LFR Sarkareth. Even within that, like 1 week, it was fine. The next week, absolute chaos. People were getting vote kicked from the group. It was all mad. Then, the amount of times, like as an example, I barely touch, like I don't touch Mythic Plus without, without a large number of people with my guild, being there. And we're all just kind of like that because Mythic Plus with randos, like, yeah, it absolutely sucks. I think about my days playing League of Legends with Matt, and that was like a 2-week period, and then we fell in, and then we sort of got out of League of Legends, but within that 2 weeks, like, yeah, it was League of Legends. Of course, there was lots of toxicity everywhere because, the second somebody decides to throw the game, and you're just kind of screwed with the whole thing. I did get back into Overwatch a little bit just before this summer, had a lot of fun. I would say with like 4 days of playing like a good few hours every day, probably saw major toxicity like 2 or 3 times. It was never aimed at me. It was never like ruining the experience or anything, but it was mildly annoying. And here, I'm definitely going like, my bar is like a little bit above trash talk. So I suppose it is to say that like, yeah, it doesn't really impact me because I mostly play games with friends. I don't spend that much time in public lobbies, but yeah, it is true that it happens a fair amount. And it's one of those challenging things where one person can ruin the experience for far more people. It's why when you look at MOBAs, like one toxic player can just ruin like 30 or 40 minutes of everybody else's time. Think about how many other people there are. That's a hell of a lot of time. In World of Warcraft, somebody can just decide, you know what, screw it. I'm going to deplete your Mythic Plus key. So rip your progress, rip everybody's time. Broadly, I'm not really sure what the best way to do this is. Usually, right, I think less about like creating big punishments. I mean, sure, in some cases you do just need to ban people. But I'd be more thinking about like positive incentives, right? How can somebody feel like it is in their rational best interest not to be super toxic? Now that's kind of tricky then, because if you start rewarding people for good behavior, then they're kind of being good for the wrong reasons, right? So it is sort of challenging. I would like to know what you think though, and to what degree this kind of behavior actually impacts you in the games that you play. It's funny, I've often found the more niche I go, the more reasonable people are. And I'm sure there's examples of the opposite, but I remember I spent a lot of time playing a mod. It was a source mod called Resistance and Liberation, like a World War II shooter. It was great. Tiny community, but everybody was so nice. I also remember playing the various, like musket-based sort of Napoleonic era mods, for Mountain Blades, and also the source mods as well. I think there was an American Civil War one too, or was it the Revolution? I forget exact. No, it was the Revolutionary War. Yeah, and small little communities. With those, I really just had some of the best times. Even with something like Rainbow Six Siege, and I don't know where Siege is right now. It was weird. I remember people could be really toxic, but whenever somebody said, "Oh, hey, that guy's new," the toxic people then changed their tune. Now, that's back when that game was kind of still in its upward rise after its launch errors had been fixed. Maybe now that it's kind of got its just entrenched player base, maybe the toxicities came back in. Don't exactly know. But overall, let me know what your experience has been with toxicity in gaming. Does it annoy you? Is it one of those things where you just don't like the way that a decent percentage of your gaming time can kind of be ruined by a small number of assholes? Because ultimately, when we're playing, cooperative or competitive games online, small group of assholes can do a lot of damage. Let me know what you think. That's it for today's episode, though. Of course, you can check out what we published yesterday, and I will see you back here tomorrow.